I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast. Welcome back to the Great Work Podcast. Today we have on Hebrew Hammer. You guys all know him from TikTok. He's one of my favorite people on TikTok. I've learned so much more from you than my college professors on the topic. So the depth of knowledge you have on this is fascinating, and I'm so excited to have you on.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and it's a privilege to be on your show, and I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to speak on your platform. I look forward to a fun, engaging conversation, and hopefully we can educate some people and teach them about the conflict in the Middle East while adding a little bit of humor and excitement to the conversation.
Definitely. So, first of all, can you give a little bit of your background, like just a little bit about you? Because I see you, how I came across you was on, I think, Rudy's lives, and then I noticed that you went on everyone's lives and you would be the only person with your camera open, and like the comments just go nuts when you go up there, like it's like, and I was like, wow, this guy, and then you really know what you're talking about. So, but since I've learned all of that from you, I haven't ever learned like your background as much. So I think viewers would love to hear that.
Okay. So, American Jew. My mother's Israeli, born in Israel, moved to the United States, met my father, and she stayed. And as part of my growing up, I would go to Israel every summer. So as soon as school ended, a few days later, I was in Israel. A few days before summer break ended, I was back. So I have a lot of experience inside of Israel going back to when I was born, unfortunately, I hate to say it, the mid 70s. So I got to see Israel's transformation in a way from, sort of a small, struggling, up and coming country into the powerhouse it is now. I've been through the West Bank. I was in Gaza in 1980. So I was able to see and do a lot of things that maybe not even a lot of Israelis do, because for them, it's their country, so it's not as important to see. I came onto TikTok during COVID, as a matter of fact, and it started out as doing dances and trends with my kids because we were locked down and there was nothing else to do. And I saw them doing TikTok and I said, I'll join you. And I started doing that. And then as time went on, that got a little boring. I'm not very good at dancing, to be quite honest with you. And so that was a bit of a challenge for me to keep up with them. And it sort of morphed into this Israel-Palestinian conflict, Middle East history. It developed from there. And everything I know is either from firsthand experience being in Israel or just, being self-taught. My office is filled with books. I'm a voracious reader. And so it all comes down from a genuine interest in the subject, but also a passion because it's part of who I am. It's part of my history. It's part of my heritage. I feel it coursing through my veins. And so for me, it's a project of passion as much as it is intellectual curiosity.
Totally. I think it's interesting now, like none of us are getting paid. It's just a truly fascinating topic. And it's also fascinating the difference that we see on TikTok, just that no one's learned any of this stuff. It's crazy. Like they have to learn this because the misinformation is everywhere.
Well, I think you raise a couple really interesting points. The first thing with regards to getting paid, I don't get paid. I would love to get paid. If someone wants to pay me, I'm perfectly happy to accept your money. That being said, whether or not someone's getting paid or not doesn't change the facts. Facts are facts. Truth is truth. History is history. And whether you're paying someone to say those things or not, it doesn't change the reality. So if anyone wants to DM me or send me a message after this podcast and offer me some money, I'm more than happy to accept it. But I think it also comes down to this other issue you raised about, people coming onto TikTok and they know a little bit and they want to talk about it. I think it's very emblematic and symptomatic of sort of how things are done in the modern times, which is this idea that feelings and narrative are more important than facts and history. And we hear this expression, and it drives me crazy. Is you have your truth and I have my truth, and it's like, well, no, there is the truth. There is objective facts, and now you can form an opinion, and it can be on either side of the equation based on those facts. You can disagree with how things happen. I don't approve of this. I didn't agree with that, and that's fine. That's fair, right? And you can come to a conclusion on anything you want, so long as it comes from a shared set of facts. The example I like to give is with regards to weather. I know it's a little cliche, but you and I could walk outdoors and it could be 90 degrees. And you could be like, wow, it's really hot. That's an opinion. And I could say, oh, no, it's perfect. And that's an opinion. What's objectively true is that it's 90 degrees. And
Yeah.
how we perceive, how we feel that 90 degrees is different to different people. Same thing with history and facts. Certain events transpired. Whether you agree with those events, whether you think they should or shouldn't have happened, you can agree or disagree with that stuff, but you can't deny that certain things actually happened. And this is, I think, where the problem with this debate comes from. People too often are talking past each other because we're not starting with an agreed shared set of facts. And without that agreed shared set of facts, how can you have a reasonable discussion? Because you're not talking about the same things. So for me, what I like to say is, I don't debate, I educate, because I'm not trying to change your mind. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're coming up to talk to me, you've got your mind made up, and that's fine. But there are lots of people, hundreds, thousands, that are in the comment section that are just like you, maybe trying to learn or understand or gain a little bit more knowledge. And that's what I want to provide is the historical basis for coming to a conclusion. And if that conclusion is on my side, great. And if it's not on my side, hey, you win some, you lose some. But as long as you understand that this is what happened, these are the events that transpired, this is what led up to where we are today, and then maybe we can have a reasonable discussion about it.
Totally. Well, and I find that that's the hardest thing about trying to have, like what you said, a reasonable discussion, because most people don't know the history, or they'll just, then we devolve into like, well, what's your source? What's your source? And they believe everything that Hamas tells them and nothing, or Al Jazeera, which is Hamas, and then nothing that comes out of Israel. And it's just so interesting to me. Like,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually did a video stitching a girl today, and she was talking about how Israel is losing, and started talking about all these things that supposedly happened to the IDF in Gaza. And I went through some of her old videos, and each video is literally her just sitting there and talking and making these wild accusations. And you're like, well, wait a second, if all this is happening, and in the video I stitched today, she was saying, Israeli sources say, Israeli sources say. And I'm like, why don't you show those Israeli sources? Like, if I can figure out how to take a screenshot and do green screen, the younger people should be able to do it too. And it's the comment section is like, right on, sister. Oh, you're speaking facts. You're telling the truth. And it's like, not one of them said, hey, boy, it would be interesting to see that so I could verify it. And I think this goes to the point I made earlier about, especially with your generation, unfortunately, and I think you're unique, and this is why I was excited to do your podcast, because I feel like you're outside the norm for your generation, which is this desire to truly know if something is true and accurate or not. And the only way to do that is not just Israeli sources or Palestinian sources, but as many sources as you can, right? Certain things are going to be a little gray, and so maybe you have to come to your own conclusion. But none of them even asked. And that was the thing that's just like, the thing she's saying is insane. Now we can have the discussion about, is Israel meeting all of its military objectives? Is the amount of troop casualties worth the military objectives that you're trying to achieve? Those are reasonable discussions. But when, northern Gaza is like 50% and Israel is operating freely in Gaza City and all the northern cities and is surrounding Khan Yunis and, showing body cam footage and stuff of hundreds and hundreds of people surrendering, tunnel shafts being blown up, airstrikes, you have to ask yourself, like, what is the issue here? And again, it's this idea which I think has really infected your generation, which is my feelings are more important than anything else. And it's not. Ben Shapiro said very simply, facts over feelings, or facts don't care about your feelings. And for the younger generation, it's feelings don't care about your facts. And it's everything is backwards. And how do we turn that around? How do we switch that? I don't know, one person at a time, like you, a curious mind, someone that's inquisitive and desiring to learn more. But I think that's the biggest challenge we're really facing today, especially on this particular issue, is how do we break through this wall of feelings that people have created so that we can just at least present to them the facts. And listen, and I tell people all the time, I'll tell you the facts, and you can still hate Israel. You can still not support anything about Israel. I don't care. That doesn't matter to me. But you should at least base that opinion on reality.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's definitely a struggle.
So when I started the podcast, two guys reached out to me who are starting a media company, and they wanted me to start it under their umbrella, and those talks fell through. So not getting paid for the people, but it started as that discussion, and they had led a trip to Israel with like influencers last summer, I guess, or a couple months ago. And they were saying, we discussed this in like early October. They were saying that one girl, they were on the Galilee, and one girl looks at them and was like, this is like the coolest thing I've ever done. I want to do this for the rest of my life, like show people about Israel. And they go, well, great, I'll get you this fact sheet and I'll get you this. And she goes, no, I don't want to do homework. I want people to feel what I feel. And I
Right.
thought that was kind of interesting because it's hard. I think telling people the facts is what you need to do, because these people have been lied to, and they need to be directly confronted with every opinion I have right now is not based in reality. And the only way you can do that is by teaching them the abject reality. But on the flip side, I do wish that there were people who could speak more to the visceral emotional side of things, because every live I go in, there are Israelis with family members being held hostage, and they're like, we don't want anything bad for Gaza. And it's like, say you want the worst things in the world to happen in Gaza. That's how I would feel if I were in your shoes. You're allowed to feel that way. Maybe show people like the actual raw emotional side, because that's the only thing they have going for them. Because in my opinion, facts aren't really on their side,
Right.
So it's an interesting thing. And I just think like with that side, women only care about emotions, and the left in America has really zeroed in on women, unmarried women, and that's all they have to do. I mean, my comments, I've blocked most of these women now, but my comments in all my videos would like not refute one fact, and they would be like, well, what about the children? And it's like, well, we hear that the child that pretended to feed Mia Shem while she was being held captive and then took the candy bag away from her to like rub it in her face, a 10-year-old. I was taught by my parents that was extremely rude. I would never be allowed to do that or do something like that at 10 years old. This kid thought it was okay to do. Maybe we can have a discussion about like this child that you guys are so worried about. I don't know. I don't know how we combat that. But starting with a basis in fact is a great place to start.
Well, I think, you raise a few good points, and I think we have to understand that a lot of the failure, and I talk about this on my lives too, and it definitely upsets people in your generation, younger people, let's say 25 and under is what I'm referring to as younger generation. And it really is a failure on the part of parents to teach these kids the importance of critical thinking, the importance of analyzing a situation. Again, it goes to this idea of your feelings are so important. There was a movement, starting about 20 years ago, this whole self-esteem movement where it was, my kid's self-esteem is the most important thing. And so it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of telling your kid how wonderful they are and how great they are. And this is the whole joke about participation trophies. And it Doesn't matter if you're good or bad, you're going to get rewarded for it. And it comes from this idea, and this happens generationally, where there are these parenting trends. For years and years and years, breastfeeding was all anyone did. And then in the 70s, it was no, bottle feeding is the way to go. And then it was like, well, no, the data shows that breastfeeding is actually better. So there's a lot of trends, and we're now in a trend with your generation with parents who wanted to be their kids' friends. They want to be their buddies, and buddies and friends supposedly support each other. I tell my friends, if I'm doing wrong or I'm doing something you don't agree with, tell me, because I don't claim perfection. And if you think I'm doing something in a way that I could be doing it better, I'm acting in a way that's not appropriate, whatever the case may be, please be honest with me, because I want to be the best version of myself. And sometimes it's hard to self-analyze, right? Sometimes you need that independent third party who's removed from the situation, who can see you in a different light and be like, hey, maybe you're not doing this right, or maybe this is a better way to do it. And it's like, oh, that's important. And so we have this movement that just pushes this idea of feelings, and I think it's doing a disservice to the people. I tell people all the time, I can't wait till my kids get out in the workforce and they have to compete against your kids, because my kids have been taught truth and reality and objectivity and hard work, and how to take criticism, constructive criticism anyways, so that they'll be ready to go when your kids are cowering in fear, or wilting away when someone tells them they're not perfect. So we have that part of it. And I think this is a problem that a lot of people on my side don't understand, is you have different kind of pro-Palestinian supporters. First, you have actual Palestinians who live there, right? That's one group of people. Then you have pro-Palestinians who have never lived there, and all they know is what they've been told. And then, of course, the third main category, I mean, there's a few more, but the main one is your American, especially leftists, who really have no idea about anything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been proven by data and studies that has since been done, since the war started. But they frame every dynamic, every relationship in this oppressed, oppressor, white, black, very binary mindset. And somehow, 80 years after the Holocaust, when Jews were certainly not white enough to survive the gas chambers and ovens, we've become now part of this, white supremacy culture and society. And it's such a dramatic shift. I think it's caught a lot of Jewish people off guard, who tend to be on that side of the aisle, who thought that, being BLM and social justice and LGBTQIA and whatever alphabetical acronym you can throw into it, they felt like that was some sort of protection, an immunity of sorts from what people like me, who were never part of that group, really understood to be a transactional allyship. It's you're our ally when it's convenient, but at the end of the day, we're going to turn on you right away. And so when people on my side are talking, they have to understand that it's not one single pro-Palestinian supporter. You have this dynamic of people coming from different points of view. And so their knowledge base is altered by where their starting point is. Leftists are coming from this Marxist, critical race theory dynamic. You have your pro-Palestinians in the diaspora who are just told oral tradition by their family. And then you have Palestinians that live in the situation itself, who are going to have a different experience. Listen, I understand and recognize the need for checkpoints. It's a logical step for what was happening in Judea and Samaria. The terrorist attacks, the suicide bombings, the throwing of stones, the sniping, etc. That being said, I can recognize and understand that someone in Judea and Samaria who has to go through the checkpoints, who's not a terrorist, who just wants to work and make some money, that experience is going to certainly affect how they view the overall picture. And so it's just about recognizing these different interest groups, let's call them for the sake of discussion, and how they're going to view the subject, and just being cognizant of that.
Totally.
That would be my answer for that.
Yeah. The American point of it is the most fascinating to me, because I've realized that particularly people on the left in America, like you said, have no idea about any of this. And they just, like, one of the things I noticed or realized is that the resistance groups, okay, Hamas, Palestinian Authority, whatever you want to call the 9 other terror groups there, because they're terror groups, they want Palestine to be from the river to the sea with no Israeli state whatsoever. And once they take over all of that land, they don't want the Jews to live peacefully like they claim they did under the Ottomans. They want the Jews either to leave or to kill all of them. Americans think, like these American left people think, that Israel could just all pack their bags and leave that genocide, ethnic cleansing part out. And it's like, no, that's kind of the point for these groups, though. So if you're backing them or thinking that there's some legitimate claim to that, I was taught that there's just right and wrong. That's kind of like what Judeo-Christian values teach, is like there is just right and just wrong. And killing in that capacity is just wrong. And there's no reason to do that. And what Israel's doing with the IDF in Gaza is not just killing anyone. It is a defensive war that they're fighting in. But these are all things that are like break their brain. Like they don't understand, like defensive war is not the same as terrorism. Like
Right.
you can't have Palestinian leadership without there's none there. Like there's none with popular support.
Yeah, I mean, with people that chant from the river to the sea, the pro-Palestinians and actual Palestinians, we all understand what that means, right? That is a desire and a call to ethnically cleanse the Jews from the country, and you see it all the time. Move back to Poland, move back to Europe. You know, majority of people in Israel have never been to Europe, never stepped foot in Europe, have no connection to Europe whatsoever, and yet they want the people of Israel to pack their bags and all move to Lithuania, or that they have no idea, maybe couldn't even find it on a map. So I think you have that group. I think with the left wing American support, they're just going along to get along, so to speak, with the phrase. And there was a political survey done a couple weeks ago, and it was written about in the Wall Street Journal. And this political scientist hired a pollster, and he interviewed a few hundred college students, and starting from the premise of from the river to the sea, you chant this, right? It was all specifically people that went out and chanted it. And the results were fascinating. I mean, really fascinating. Only 47% could identify the sea and the river that they were even talking about. And some of the other answers that came up were like the Atlantic Ocean, which you would think would be obvious. It says ocean in the name, so there's not from the river to the ocean, it's from the river to the sea. The Caribbean, the Nile, and the Euphrates, which at least are in the same geographic ballpark. So you had over half of the people who were chanting something and they had no idea what they were chanting. Now, this is a classic example of being a sheep, right? This is, I'm going to follow the herd and just make the noises of the other sheep because that's what they're doing. Then some of the other questions that came up in that were, do you know who Yasser Arafat is? A quarter of them did not know who it was. And a portion of those thought Yasser Arafat was the first prime minister of Israel. One of the questions asked was, in what decade were the Oslo Accords signed? 25% said no such agreement even existed. Like, something that's easily verifiable, right? There's no question that the Oslo Accords were signed. Even the other side admits that they were signed. They may not like it, but they acknowledge it was signed. But then the amazing thing about the conclusion of that study was when those people were sat down and told just some basic facts. We're not talking a semester-long course instruction. We're talking a few basic facts about geography, Middle East, and demographics. 67% said we're going to stop with that chant, that chant no longer is something we feel comfortable doing. So the little glimmer of hope is that a little bit of education can go a long way. Now, you have to find those people. Some of them are just, so emotional that you're not going to break through, but that doesn't mean you don't try. And so the from the river to the sea thing is quite clearly, quite obviously, we know from that side, it's a desire to wipe out Israel's existence. And look, if that's what you want, that's what you want. I mean, I'm not going to, obviously I don't agree with you. I think it's wrong, but that's a position you want. Good luck with that. I think it's going to lead to a life of disappointment because Israel's obviously not going anywhere, but certainly you can come to that conclusion. And so again, it's about identifying these different groups and understanding where they're coming from, and then trying to target your message for that specific group and realizing that it's it's not a catch-all for everybody. Different people come at it from different reasons. And you were saying more women, or it was your words, that women tend to be more emotional. I think we are seeing that in the pro-Palestine movement, though I think it's more of an anti-Israel movement. But I think what we're also seeing is a real stark generational divide.
Mhm.
I think the polling, and there's been multiple polls now done since October 7th, shows that as people get older, support for Israel increases, right? And the people that support the Palestinian cause, supposedly, the most are people that tend to be younger. Now, starting in the 60s, and again, this is the people that are raising kids today, there was this aphorism to never trust anyone over 30, right? This was a big thing in the 60s. And I was always taught, and I always understood, that people that are older have more wisdom. And that wisdom comes from life experience and acquiring knowledge over a period of time. Obviously, someone that's 48 like myself, just because I've been on earth longer, I'm going to have more of an opportunity to acquire knowledge than you are. It doesn't mean I'm better than you are. It just means that I have a 25-year head start on you of reading books and studying the subject. So this is what we're seeing now, this rehash, this reboot of this 60s idea to never trust anyone over a certain age. And it's like, it's weird because in some cultures, right, elders, by the way, in Arab culture especially, elders are held in the highest regard and respected. In East Asian culture, Japan, Korea, China, elders are put up on a pedestal, right? In America, especially, it's like you reach a certain age and all of a sudden your opinion no longer matters, no longer has validity. And to me, it's the opposite.
Mhm.
The younger you are, the less valid your opinion is, just because you don't have the knowledge base and the life experience to come to such a strong conclusion. And I'll finish this answer with a quote that's been attributed to Churchill, but we don't really know if he said it. But the quote basically goes, if at 20 you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. And if at 40 you're not a conservative, you don't have a brain.
Mhm.
And what the quote is talking about is how you go from a younger, more emotional person, and as you grow into adulthood, you realize that emotionality is not the way to live your life, right? You should never make an important decision when you're angry, right? Like after you break up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you're really upset, you shouldn't go out and buy a car or plan a trip because you're not thinking clearly because the emotions are clouding your mind. And as you get older, it becomes easier to separate emotion from reality, so to speak, or rationality is a better way to say it. And these younger people are not there yet because they're told that their feelings are so important. And this is where the whole "you're a snowflake" comes from.
Mhm.
Everyone is this unique, special snowflake, and you've got to, you know, cater to it and hold it and baby it. And the reality is, none of us is all that special. We're all just, I tell people, we're all a grain of sand. You pull up an individual grain of sand from the beach, and it's nothing. It'll fall off your finger. But it takes all these grains of sand together, community, society, nations, to make the beach. And I don't think I'm that important. I'm just a guy out there trying to educate people. But I know that all the other people like me together make up that beach. And so, we all just try to do our little bit of our part. It's these younger people, your generation, unfortunately, who think they're so special and that their opinion matters so much. It's like, I said it, so you must listen to me. And it's like, I'm 48 years old. No disrespect, but you're 22, 23, 24. There's nothing you're going to teach me. And unfortunately, your mind is too closed off to the idea that I could actually teach you something. And that's where I think we need to get to. And that's on the parents. It's really on the parents.
It is on the parents. I don't know. I don't know how. I know, like, I saw an interview right when Trump became president with George W. Bush, and it was on the Today Show. And Kathy Lee Gifford, I think, said, like, how do we move on from being so divided? And he's like, we've never been this divided. And he said, well, I grew up in the 70s and 60s. I mean, it was pretty divided then too, and we got over it. So I'm hoping that there's like a Reagan era coming or something where we're all kind of happy again. But I don't know. I'm getting really worried with how anti-West a lot of young people are. And it's not even like I'm 28, so I'm like kind of past that. But my siblings are all conservative, so they're all younger than me, and they're not really that radical. But God, the things I hear that the people say, like their friends say and stuff, I'm like, you hate America? Like, oh, how are you going to snap out of that? This goes to the next topic I want to talk to you about, because I think I kind of knew part of this, but I've learned, like I said, more from you than my college professors on the subject. I had a weird time in college because I changed colleges and changed majors. I had majority Muslim professors who were all much more, I don't know if I would say pro-Israel, but much more neutral on the topic than my white professors, which I think is really interesting, but not all that unusual. And I think that, like, I learned all of this stuff. I learned a lot about radical Islam, the history, all of these types of things. And really, where it gets pro-Palestine biased is they'll just like really hammer home a talking point that maybe you can question the validity, maybe isn't the full story. I think one of them is like, during the war of 1948 and 19 that Jewish militias were telling Palestinians that they were all going to be killed, or I don't know, going throughout like telling them all to leave, or I don't remember exactly the story, but like it is true that there were militias who intimidated Arabs prior to 1948. It is also true that Arabs intimidated the Jews since they arrived on the land. And both of those things happen, and maybe they only focus on the Jewish militias that did it or something. But I've learned so many facts from you. I wanted to ask like some of your favorite lesser known facts about the conflict. Break people's brains a little bit.
Well, I think the most important one. See, first, before I get to that, real quick, I think the problem we have, or at least that I've experienced in talking about the history, is especially with really hard pro-Palestinian supporters. It's twofold. One, the understanding that history it's not a buffet, okay? It's not where you can just go stand in line and you get to pick and choose. Oh, I like egg rolls, but I don't want taquitos. Oh, I'll take some noodles, but I don't want a slice of pizza. If you're going to use history as a talking point, then you have to go all the way back, right? Because anyone can pick an arbitrary point in history and start moving forward from there to try and make their narrative work. That's not how history works, because everything leads into the thing before it, right? You can't talk about 48 without talking about the British Mandate. You can't talk about the Mandate without talking about World War I and the Ottoman Empire, and then the Mamelukes before that, and the Crusades before that, and the Islamic conquest before that, and the Byzantines before that, and on and on and on. It all flows through one another. So to just selectively choose, well, this happened in 1947 and there were Israeli militias or Jewish militias that were, yeah, the Jewish militias started because the Arabs under Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, who started what was called the Fedayeen in 19, were created to terrorize the Jews who were living there, to intimidate them out of living there, to scare people who might want to come. I mean, that's one of the great lies that is told on the other side is, well, we welcomed you with open arms. No, as a matter of fact, you stood on the docks throwing rocks at us as we were getting off the ships. You were appealing to the British to close off immigration. When we did get there, we were being terrorized. And the Jews realized that the British weren't going to do anything to defend Jewish interests. And so they had to take matters into their own hands. Does that mean that every Jewish militia, Haganah, Irgun, Lehi, Palmach, that they all acted perfectly? Of course not. Of course not. But the issue I think a lot of pro-Israel people find themselves in getting into is that the Palestinians they lack nuance. They are incapable of acknowledging that good and bad comes with each thing, and then at the end of the day, you have to weigh it like a scale, and it shifts to either good or bad overall. The Irgun were not perfect. The Palmach were not perfect. The Haganah were not perfect. On the whole, though, it was a totally different ballgame. They were attacking British military interests. They were trying to evict the colonizers so that they could establish a land. Sometimes they attacked Arab civilians in retaliation. Sure, it's not right. It's not good. I think any reasonable person would speak out against that. But you have to understand the context of something that led up to it, right? They like to talk about, well, this happened in this year without mentioning that doctors and nurses were attacked on the way to the Hadassah hospital in and they attacked a bus of nurses and doctors, and 80 people were unalived, or I can say killed here, I guess. But 80 people were killed, and so that's the problem with history, is you can't just pick your own starting date. But I think the biggest one that really, I think, is a dark cloud over the whole discussion is the idea of the Nakba. And it's truly remarkable how this story has taken hold in spite of the overwhelming amount of written evidence at the time, primary source, firsthand account evidence to show that that's not actually what happened. Now, was there displacement? Was there a large movement of Arabs in Palestine? Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. Were some of them forced out? Were some of them displaced forcefully? Absolutely, 100%. But the overwhelming, and I would say overwhelming 85 to 90% of Arabs in Palestine left, and they left on their own. They left as a result of either instructions from the Arab Higher Committee, from Haj Amin al Husseini, the Grand Mufti, to leave, and that they could come back in a couple weeks after the Jews were slaughtered. I mean, we have just overwhelming evidence of this. You have others that just left based on rumor. They're going to come for us. It's gossip spreads like wildfire, so we're going to leave. Mostly the Arabs that were actually displaced were those villages that were along transportation routes. And the Jews were getting sniped as they were trying to get materials from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv to Haifa. And so some of those villages had to be cleared out to allow for open transportation access. But we have firsthand accounting from I.F. Stone, who's a world-recognized investigative journalist. The book is called This is Israel. I think I'll find it next time you're talking so I can show it. Who published the book in 1949 and clearly talks about Haifa and Jaffa and Jerusalem and the Galilee. Another book, Ephraim Karsh, The Arab-Israeli Conflict, using British military archive sources and firsthand accounting sources, shows the same thing. Quotes from the Arab Higher Committee telling the people of Haifa, you must leave, and we don't care if you starve. You're not going to stick around with the Jews. Meetings between Jewish leaders and Arab leaders where the Jews, Shabtai Levi, the mayor of Haifa, was begging the Arabs of the city who were his friends, like he knew them. He was saying, please stay. The British were writing, like he's crying, he's in tears. And the Arabs saying, no, we can't make an agreement with you. We're going to leave. I have firsthand sourcing from this guy. This is probably the best one I found. This book called The Meaning of Disaster by Konstantin Zarek. This is the guy that came up with the term the Nakba. He's an Arab historian, pan-Arabist. You read the last 15 pages of this book and you can tell he's no fan of Jews because it's like straight out of the protocols of Elders of Zion. Jews are Khazars and they control the banks and they control the media. When he talked about the Nakba, it wasn't forced displacement. He doesn't mention any of that. When he talks about what he meant by the Nakba was the failure of the Arab countries to sufficiently arm the troops that were fighting and to show enough support for the people to defeat the Zionists, though sometimes he slips into Jews too. But that was the Nakba. The catastrophe, the disaster, was they didn't fight hard enough. He even says, we weren't willing to die for our cause, and the Jews were willing to die for their cause because they had, and he even said it, they had no other place to go. And we were fleeing to Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt. So I think this is the biggest one because, and I know you've seen it too, it all starts out from this basic premise they believe. The land was stolen. And if you think about that, let's try to put ourselves in their shoes, right? If you believed that, right? If you believed this was ours and this foreign group came and took it away from us, I would understand how that would lead to a lack of a desire to coexist because you took something from me. But it falls apart on the fact that, one, it wasn't their land, it was the British. They were never sovereign and in control of that land at any point in history. They, like us, were subjugated to foreign invaders and empires and kingdoms. And so for something to be stolen, and again, this is where nuance comes in, there has to be ownership, right? If you're walking down the street and you find a $10 bill and you pick it up, well, you're not stealing it from anybody. You found it. If you go reach into someone's wallet and you take it, that's theft. when you say that land was stolen, you're suggesting quite clearly that that was your land, and it wasn't. And that was the whole point of partition and the UN getting involved, is that it wasn't anybody's land, and there needed to be some sort of resolution to this conflict about who goes where and who lives where. So once the partition plan came and the Jews accepted and the Arabs attacked and the Arabs lost, they had to come up with this story to further the grievance, because they couldn't just say we said no and we lost, because if that's the case, well, I mean, tough bleep, you know what I mean? It sucks for you. But if it was they stole it from us, it was our land, they don't belong here, then you can continue this grievance. And as we've kind of alluded to earlier, victimhood, being a perpetual victim, which is what the woke left is all about, that sells, because it attracts, or it appeals, I should say, to emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easier to appeal to emotion than it is to appeal to rationality. And so they keep up this grievance. And so to me, that's the biggest one, is this idea that the Jews, who were just out of the Holocaust, were underarmed, undermanned, not only fought off 6 Arab countries, but in the process of fighting off 6 Arab countries, went around the state of Israel, forcibly kicked. Like, that's an amazing army for 19, like, if that's actually true, got to give Israel credit for being able to do all those things, but it's just simply not true. And I think that's, from that stems all the problems we are running into today.
Totally.
That was a long answer. Sorry about that.
No, that's the American people did, because evangelicals make up a big population in the United States. Evangelicals support Jews being in Israel because they believe that Jesus will come back at the rebuilding of the temple. And if there's a Jewish state there, you'd think that they'd start rebuilding the temple and kick all ox out. They have not done that. They have not, kind of disproving another pro-Pali point that the Jews are just trying to erase that, but whatever. But also, so we didn't arm them in 1948, and they won that war using Czech weapons that were being produced to sell to the Nazis. So the weapons that the Jews fought in that war with had Nazi emblems on them. And I just think that's fascinating, because people think, well, basically Israel's just a puppet of the United States, but then at the same time that we're just completely bought by AIPAC. So who is the owner here? They don't know, because it goes back and forth. But also, no, we were arming the Arabs and had an embargo on Israel. The only reason they won is using Nazi weapons.
Yeah, from the Czech Republic. And I think, again, this comes to the idea that they can't accept that they lost, right? And so rather than just analyze the situation dispassionately, like a rational person would do, and say, yeah, you were divided, you had different countries who had different objectives in this war. None of them, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, none of them was fighting for the Palestinians.
No.
They were all fighting either to eradicate the Jews. In the case of Jordan, King Abdullah, he thought he was going to be the ruler of the entire land. He wanted to be the king of all of the British Mandate of Palestine, including Jerusalem. In Syria, you had Faisal, who wanted to take over the northern part. In Egypt, they wanted to take over the southern part. So none of them were fighting for Palestinians. And the reality is, Israel had no business winning that war, but she fought an enemy that had no continuity, no cohesiveness in their objectives. And so they weren't coordinating attacks, they weren't coordinating offensives. It was, we're doing this thing, we're doing this thing, we're doing this thing. So when we talk about the 48 Independence War, the better way to describe it would be the 48 Independence Wars, because each country Israel was fighting against, it was a different type of war where they had a different objective. They were trying to do different things. And listen, I get it. Like, no one wants to admit that they lost, right? Because, I mean, at least from my point of view, winning is better than losing. But I grew up in an era where participation trophies weren't a big thing. Winning is better than losing. So to acknowledge the Jews, who were plucky and spirited and undermanned, they defeated us, because at the time of the 48 war, there were 300 million Arabs living in the surrounding countries. And you're talking about, less than 1 million Jews at that particular point in time. So that's an embarrassing defeat, right? And so coming at it from this point of just denying the reality. So they come up with these excuses. The Americans supported you, totally false. Like you said, they had an arms embargo. The British supported you, totally false. There was a British naval blockade. We have quotes from Foreign Secretary Bevin at the time talking about how they were going to enforce the blockade against Israel, but continue to sell arms and give arms to Arabs. Like, these are quotes from these actual people that we have. We know that on the Arab side, they had Nazis who had escaped Germany who were fighting for them. They had Polish mercenaries. They had Muslims from Bosnia. I mean, they had a whole group of people. But again, it's Israel had, at least as best as she could at that point in time, a professional army. And by that, I mean a command and control hierarchy. You had brigades and divisions that were all operating with the same objective, all answering to the same authority, up the chain of command. And so that's why Israel won. She was just better. I wouldn't even say better trained. She was better, maybe not even motivated. She had a better purpose. And the ultimate thing is we had no place to go. If the Jews lost, it would have been the end of Jews for the most part in the world. It would have taken, a few generations, but that was it. Couldn't go back to Europe. That experiment didn't go well. Couldn't go to the Arab countries because we were in the process of getting kicked out of the Arab countries. The United States and Canada were rejecting Jews after World War II in large numbers. So we had no place to go. We had no option. They had all these Arab countries they could go to. And because they weren't a unique Palestinian identity, if they lost, they just moved. And that was, one of the people the pro-Palestinians love to use is Benny Morris. And I think Benny Morris is a very honest historian. He acknowledges he's left-wing. And he says 2/3 of the supposed refugees just moved from one part of Palestine to the other. Well, if you go from Jerusalem to Jenin, you're not a refugee. It's just like moving. It's like moving. It's not even moving states. It's not like moving from Texas to Ohio. It's like moving from San Antonio to Houston. You just moved from one spot in the same territory to the next spot. So, but again, if your starting premise is this is not Jewish land, there's no Jewish connection to the land, this is our land, then you can claim this refugee status. And again, it all starts with the Nakba. But what this book, This is Israel, talks about is at the time of the 48 war, the population of what was to be Israel, right? Forget the Arab part of what was supposed to be Palestine. It was 5 Jews and about 3 Arabs. So there were more Jews living in what was to be proper Israel than Arabs. But they say 700 were displaced and kicked out. It's like, but there weren't even 750,000 people in Israel. You're talking about maybe moving from one part of Judea and Samaria to another. Or since Jaffa was supposed to be part of it and you end up in Nablus, you weren't kicked out of the land because both were supposed to be your land. But they don't recognize Tel Aviv as being part of Israel. They don't believe that Haifa is part of Israel. So in their mind, they're refugees because they should be able to go wherever they want to go. And it's like I tell people, because we get into these arguments all the time about history and who's indigenous, that only matters as far as identifying why this piece of land is important to me and important to Jews. But simply having a long history in the land and simply being indigenous to the land doesn't give us the right to the land. What gives us the right to the land is we mustered the political will and the political capital, and we worked diplomatically to convince the world of the righteousness of giving this piece of land to Israel. And then we defended it, and we won a war that we didn't start. That's why it's our land. It's our land because we worked harder to make it an achievable dream, and we fought harder to defend that dream.
Totally.
The fact that I have ancestors that go back 3,500 years ago, that's not relevant to today. It's relevant to why I think it's important, why it matters to me. But I tell Palestinians all the time, if you guys rise up and you defeat Israel and you take over and you march into Jerusalem, and it's your country now. Doesn't mean it's any less important to me. Doesn't mean it's still not the home of my ancestors. But if you take it, if you win, you're victorious, it's your land. We defended our land. We worked harder at it. And I'll finish with this because I know I've been going on for a little bit.
Okay.
We see it playing out today, right? The Jews were mostly unified in purpose back then, raising money, working the diplomatic angle, appealing to the UN, appealing to the United States. with this common cause, this idea that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is important to us. And this is where we want to be. This is where we want to plant roots. This is where we want to build our foundation for the future. And we see that now, right? The pro-Palestinians, what are they doing? I was flipping through TikTok this morning before I went to sleep, and I saw a group of people. I don't know what city it was in, and I don't know how many of them there were there, but from the sound of it, maybe 20 or 30 people with flags. And they were standing in front of a Starbucks, and the lady with a megaphone was yelling at people as they were walking out of Starbucks. And I'm like, how are you helping Palestinians by doing that? How does that get you closer to even, okay, forget coexistence, forget a two states. How are you going to wipe out Israel by harassing random people at Starbucks into not getting a Frappuccino? So while you guys are out protesting and harassing people and closing down airports and making holiday travel as difficult as humanly possible, the American Jewish community has raised $1 billion, $1 billion for the state of Israel since October 7th. Now that's equipment for the military that maybe they don't have, vests and night vision goggles. That's to help pay for hotels for displaced citizens in the kibbutzim down south or people up north. These are tangible things that we are contributing to our people in Israel that I can say, listen, I played a small part. I contributed my part, but I'm a part of it. But the idea that I'm going to go harass strangers on the street because Corporation X might do a little business with Israel, how about go raise money, go raise medical for medical supplies or food supply, something that you can say you help. You're not helping. Starbucks is going to survive. I promise you, it's going to survive if you intimidate 5 or 6 people into not buying coffee that day, because eventually you'll run out of gas, you'll run out of steam, you'll stop harassing people, and people will go back to Starbucks and they'll go back to making their money. So I think history repeats itself. We were more unified then for a common cause, and that helped us achieve victory. We're more unified now, and it's going to help us maintain that victory, which for me, victory is the state of Israel exists as the Jewish homeland. And to me, that's victory. And anything less than that would be defeat. So I just think it's just another case of history repeating itself over and over again. And the Palestinians, they never learn. They never learn. I think it was Abba Eban who said, Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And this is it right now. Your opportunity is come out against Hamas, demand the release of the hostages, condemn terror, accept the Jewish state of Israel, demand that the leadership that you have is responsive to the needs of the people that they're governing over. And if you can do all these things, which is what reasonable modern countries do, then you can achieve statehood. But you guys, I keep hearing people talking about ceasefire and what do we do about a second state? Why are we even talking about a political solution in the middle of a war? Right now, all that matters is winning the war. The political solution, we'll worry about that later. First, we got to win. Winning comes first.
Well, I think America is like uniquely bad at that. I think Americans think of war over there the same way that we do, where when we went to war in the Middle East, we had a purpose for it. 9/11 was, we deserved to attack. I don't know if the way we did it, looking back, was the right thing to do, but we were obviously going to respond. And those wars dragged on for 20 years, which, there are other societies that measure wars in centuries, but that is a forever war within the American context. And they say that, basically since we dragged out those wars, kept changing objectives, that is what war is. That's not what war in Israel is. What war in Israel is since they live next door directly to the conflict, they actually finish what they start. You know what I mean? The people there have the political will to finish what they start, and they don't have the political will for a two-state solution after this. I was just talking to a Qatari expert who's in Israel, and he was saying, he asked me about the US opinion on Trump, which I thought was funny. Like, is it the same? Like, he was saying what they hear over there, and is it the same as here? And I said, well, if you're going to ask me that, what's your opinion on Netanyahu? Is he done after this? And he goes, no, the people all say that there needs to be a political change, but no one's changing how they're voting. If anything, more people are going to vote Likud because they want to oppose a two-state. You disagree?
Bibi's toast.
Oh, you think so? Oh, he didn't think so.
No, Bibi's toast. The polling data is
A bit small.
actually that's come out. The last one I saw had Likud down to 18 seats
Oh.
and Benny Gantz up to 42 seats. And now for the first time, you're hearing at least two that I'm aware of, and I'd have to look up their names. I think one was near Barkat or something. Actual Likud members saying that they're going to challenge Bibi's leadership
Oh, wow.
after the war ends. And so that never happened before. Bibi kind of ruled Likud with an iron fist, and now you're seeing that iron fist being opened and weakened. And so I think he's done. I think the reality is you don't make a governmental change in the middle of a war. It's going to take time. But my prediction would be, and this is again, depending on when the war ends, and by war, I mean the active ground invasion, because this is going to go on for a while. The Israeli government has said this is going to last for a while, maybe on a limited scale with,
Mhm.
tactical incursions. But when the real war ends, I predict there'll be an election in Israel within 60 days, or the government will fall within 60 days. And I think Bibi's toast. And now, whether he acknowledges that and rides off into the sunset, or tries to cling on as a way to maybe try to save his legacy, I think he's toast. I think it's sad and unfortunate. I didn't like Bibi this time around. I'm not Israeli, so my opinion doesn't matter as much, and I don't have a vote. But I thought he did amazing things for Israel in the past, opening up their economy, making it much more of a free market, capitalistic system, which helped grow the economy. I think he did some good things, identifying and talking about the issue of Iran. I thought politicians for me are like milk. They all have an expiration date. And once that expiration date hits, it's spoiled and it's sour and it's not going to go back to being regular milk. It's just going to make you sick. And I think that's what we ran into with Bibi this time. He just hung around too long. But I think he's toast. I think the consensus is overwhelming. I don't think Likud is toast if they get rid of Bibi as the top of the ticket. But I think Bibi himself, I don't see him having widespread support, and I don't see him surviving this. And I think this is going to tarnish his legacy.
Yeah.
People are going to forget all the good he did, and they're going to remember him for 10-7 and what I think are pretty obvious failures that you can't just pin on the prime minister. But, Harry Truman said the buck stops here, right? He had that on his desk. When you're at the top, you're going to get blamed for everything that happens underneath you. And I think it was widespread failure, intelligence failure, military failure, political failure, diplomatic failure that led to this. But someone's got to take the blame.
Mhm.
It's like in sports. You have a team that's losing, they're going to fire the coach. They're not going to fire the players. So he's the coach of the team. And on 10-7, it was the biggest loss I would say Israel ever experienced because of the sheer scope and the barbarity of the depravity of what Hamas did. People aren't going to forget that.
No.
This isn't war. This isn't 67. This isn't 73. We get it. Bad things happen in war. We get it. People get bombed. People die. People get, grenades thrown at them. Civilians die. It's unfortunate. It's awful. We don't like it. But war is war. And you have to make a distinction. But the systematic violence against women and children, the raping, burning people, beheading people, it's this was on a different scale. Like even the Nazis didn't do this. The Nazis were horrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to not to diminish the Holocaust, but a lot. I would even say most of them were really ashamed of what they did. And within the SS and especially the higher ranking, there was a high rate of alcoholism because they would do these evil, monstrous things through the day, and then they would drink themselves to sleep because they knew what they were doing was wrong. And as the war was winding down, they were trying to burn down the camps. They were trying to hide what they did. You hide things when you're ashamed of them. The level of joy that we saw on the part of Hamas, the celebrations, I think the one thing, and I stopped watching all the gruesome videos a while ago. It just became too much. I don't need to see it. I get it. But the one that stuck out to me more than any video or audio was the kid who called his parents and he said, "You'll be so proud of me. I killed 10 Jews." He didn't say Israelis. He didn't say Zionists. He said Yehuds. And okay, well, that's sick in and of itself, right? In the middle of a massacre, like calling your mom and dad. Like I call my mom and dad to say, hey, I had a good week at work, or the kids are doing really well in school, or you know what I mean? Like he was calling to talk about how he was massacring Jews. And the dad was like, I wish I was there with you. This is amazing. This is great. And the mom, a woman who you would expect to have a little more emotional connection, was like, hey, just be careful. Just be careful. You know, and it was like, yeah, this is not even Nazi like. This is worse. This is post-Nazi. Because the Nazis weren't celebrating. They were hiding. And these people were celebrating, the GoPro cameras, all the documentation. They loved it. And I remember, and I won't forget, I remember those first 2 or 3 days flipping TikTok and seeing Palestinian live after Palestinian live. The same people crying today about genocide and ceasefire, they were effusive. They were jubilant. They were celebratory. We got back at the Zionists. We broke out of jail. We taught them a lesson. This is amazing. They were so happy. And I was like, you guys are so short-sighted, because this isn't going to be like the past. We're not just going to drop a couple bombs and say we blew up some tunnels. We're going to come in there and we're going to destroy Gaza. And you're not going to be celebrating in a few weeks. They were just, giving virtual online high fives to each other. And that to me was like I knew how bad most of them were, but to publicly celebrate, right? It's one thing to be at home. Yeah, we did it. This is amazing. But to go on a public platform and be just so happy. And again, this is before we knew a lot of the depravity. This is when information was still coming in real quick. But for a good week there, they were happy. Then once the bombing started and the ground invasion started, all of a sudden they weren't so happy anymore. But it was that, to me, was that one phone call from that kid to his parents where I was like, this is not a redeemable culture. This is a society that is rotten from the core. And now that doesn't mean every single Palestinian is bad. Please understand what I'm saying. It doesn't mean every single person in Gaza is bad, but it means on a societal level, the institutions, the media, academia are so rotted with Jew hatred that it just infects as many people as it can. And I'm sure there's decent people in Gaza, but not as many as people think. I think it's a society that needs to be reformed from the bottom up, and it's going to take, if at all possible, and I don't hold out a lot of hope, but if at all possible, it's going to take 3 generations, 60, 70 years of people teaching the next generation, stop hating Jews. We have to live. And I don't know if they can do it. I don't know if it's possible for them, because this is who they are. This is part of their identity. Like, they're just not going to give it up.
And there are 2 things from that. So we'll watch the Israeli elections and stuff. And what you're saying with this, though, 2 things with that. How do they move on from this? Another interesting fact that I heard you say is the reason the United States has a navy is because of the Barbary Coast Wars, where we asked, hey, why are you attacking us? You're attacking France. That makes sense. Why us? And they said, because you're all infidels. And there's this like really weird thing in America today where we think we are the problem in every situation and also the solution. Like, oh, if we just pull out, everything will be better. Probably not. Probably there would still be issues with Pan-Arabism, and I'll get to that in a minute. But no, they didn't like us before we invaded, like well before the Gulf War. But the 2 Bushes did everything in the Middle East. They were already preemptively attacking us, and I think that's an important little tidbit there. This is a societal thing with fundamentalist Islam, political Islamism, that there is a massive anti-Western sentiment, and a lot of it isn't deserve it. Like a lot of it, I mean, some of it you can say, yeah, they don't have to like the wars. I don't blame that at all. But a lot of it, I mean, we didn't do anything to the Barbary Coast pirates,
Yeah, I think so. This has been the hardest lesson for me, and it's where my opinion and point of view has really shifted the most as I went from a younger man to, let's say, early middle age. Is I remember two particular events that I remember that were so significant, and I look back on them, and realize how far I've come from that point of view to where I am now. I remember Oslo in 19. I remember it being signed. My mom's Israeli. My dad's been going to Israel. His first trip was in 1956 when Jordan controlled all of Judea and Samaria and the old city of Jerusalem. He was not allowed to go to the Western Wall to pray because it was under Jordanian rule. So there's a lifelong connection there. And they were watching the signing ceremony and they were crying. And I was like, what are you crying about? And my mom's like, finally, maybe there can be peace. Like, finally, maybe there's a chance of because we're coming out of the first intifada, right? This could be the chance. Like, there was such a genuine hope on their part. And I was like, oh, that'd be great. That'd be amazing. I was younger. I was 20 years old. I didn't really understand as much. I didn't know the significance that I know of it today. But I just remember the emotional response of just wanting this to be the first step to peace and how that was shattered. That illusion was shattered over time, especially at the end of it, leading into the second intifada, which was really, really awful. We saw a lot of some of the worst attacks in Israel's history, the Sbarro pizza bombing, the Dolphinarium, the Park Hotel. Like, there was just really awful attacks that happened in this 6-year period. So there was that, and then there was the Iraq War, which I was a big supporter of. I still am. I don't think we executed it as well as we should, but I think ridding the world of bad people who put other human beings in wood chippers and feed them to hogs is a net positive, even if we didn't fight it or we didn't manage it the best way possible. One of the things George W. Bush said at the time was, and I'm paraphrasing, was that there's a natural desire within every human being for liberty and for freedom. And I used to believe that. And I believe that because I was coming at everything from a Western point of view, right? These things that, well, I don't think you and I do, but I think many people do, especially enough, they take for granted this idea of pluralism, equality for women, fairness for the LGBTQ community, protection of ethnic minorities, self-governance, voting, elections, all these things that for us are just natural that we don't even think about. We assume everybody else wants that. I assumed it. And I assumed if we just give the Arab world the opportunity to see how awesome Western values and Western civilization is, they'll jump at the chance to become Western. And I was wrong. And I don't often admit that I was wrong, but they don't want Western values. They reject them outright. Yeah, maybe elections, sure. Okay, maybe that part they're cool with, but they just want to elect non-Western values type politicians to lead them. And like, again, especially as a father to 3 daughters, right? Issues when it comes to women are particularly important to me. One of my daughters is a soccer player, plays, at a high level of club soccer competition. And so I see it as a lens of a man and as a father, how important it is that my daughters have every opportunity to succeed in life as anybody else. Right now, part of that is my wife and I's parenting, of encouraging them and telling them, you want to do something, you want to do martial arts, we're right behind you. You want to do sports, we're right behind you. You want to do dance, we're right behind you. You want to learn how to shoot guns? Let's go to the range and take safety classes and we'll teach you how to shoot guns. The treatment of women, I think in particular in that part of the world, is so egregiously awful. And it took time. Like I was talking about at the very beginning of this, wisdom comes from life experience and intelligence combined together. I just assumed everybody wanted that. And now that I've learned and I've grown and I've studied, they don't want their women to be like I'm encouraging my daughters, or like what you're doing right now. Like, hey, I want to do a podcast. I want to, use all these tools at my disposal to either further my career or because I'm in whatever. It doesn't matter what the reason is. You're a woman who's empowered, who's independent, who wants to do something. And I think, from my point of view, awesome. Anything I can do to support you and help you, I'm here. In that part of the world, you're going to be looked down upon. You're going to be either prevented from doing so, or they're going to try to sabotage you. And so this is where I think too many people, especially the woke leftists, they're coming from this Western mindset. Even though they hate the West, they take advantage of all the things the West offers them. The freedom to protest, right? Do you think you could go protest the way you're Go sit and block the airport in Damascus or Mecca or Riyadh and let's see what happens to you. I promise you, you're not getting a misdemeanor and a ticket and a slap on the wrist. They are going to beat your ass publicly, flogging you, beating you. They'll throw you in jail. Depending on how pissed off they get, they might behead you in public. Who knows, right? They don't have a criminal justice. So you're taking advantage of all these Western things, freedom of protest, freedom of speech, a criminal justice system that treats everyone equally. And you're using this to your advantage while at the same time saying how much you hate the West. It's cognitive dissonance, and it's hyper cognitive dissonance. It's just so radically misinformed and miseducated, and it's and so that was a hard lesson for me to learn, was this idea that not everyone wants to be a Westerner, not everyone wants to be the United States. And as much as I love it and you love it, and we're able to see the amount of good with mistakes, right? We're not perfect. The amount of good the United States has done for the world, they see it in a completely opposite way, and it's hard to bridge that gap. Like, that's a really hard one to close the gap between those two divergent viewpoints. It's a tough one.
Yeah. And like the worst part is like, I think the other thing is, yeah, they're super anti-Western. They don't understand, because they can exist in the theoretical realm where, in theory, when they're not confronted with like basic reality, they could be correct. But then when you look at the whole picture, they're obviously not. But then the other thing is, I was talking to Michael Pregent, who's at the Hudson Institute. He's like a senior fellow, and he did counterintelligence. He did my podcast, and he was saying that, like, absent the threat of the West, it becomes sectarian. And when you talked about pan-Arabism, that's sectarian violence. They say that, like, oh, if we just spread under one Arab caliphate, whatever, get rid of Israel, get rid of this, whatever, it'll all be fine. The problem is, every time they've tried to do that, they've failed, because they have disagreements on who gets to lead the Arab superstate. It was going to be Egypt, and then Nasser died, and they tried it with Syria. And then, obviously it doesn't work to have a one state with completely separate. I don't know why they're trying to do it with the Palestinians now either, but that's so far off. It's not even really worth talking about. But then Saddam was trying to be the sole Arab guy, like, in charge. And why? It's not because he wants like the entire Arab world to be united under one. That's what he sold people politically, but really it was because the oil found in Iraq was in the Shia minority section, and he just wanted all of the access to the oil. And then the third, and now it's Iran, and so Iran is going to try and, they don't call it pan-Arabism because they're Persian, but they want the same thing too. They want everyone under Islamic rule, and they want everyone to become Shia. And so it's like, okay, if Israel just pulls out, you guys think it's just going to be peace and happiness over there? It won't be. It'll probably be the most awful, violent things we've ever seen, because there isn't a group of people who thinks it's fine to do what they did to Jews on October 7th that then just puts that away. Like, the scariest thing to me is that there are people who might have gotten away out through the tunnels under Egypt or something. I've never killed anyone. I don't plan to. So I have no idea what that's like. But from every serial killer thing I've ever seen, I think that it sets off something in their mind that they want to keep going. And I'm very scared that some of those people did that, and they're going to have something in them for the rest of their life that they just want to keep killing like that. And like, the only way you can stop people that bloodthirsty is to kill them. But ceasefire now. So it's scary.
Well, first I want to compliment you for 28 years old. You are wise beyond your years.
Thank you.
You've clearly understand and identified some of these major issues that Israel, and Israel by extension the West, are having to deal with, which is the first point you brought up, which was this idea of, within Islam, of creating this Islamic caliphate throughout the world. And you can even look throughout Islamic history. I mean, the reason that Jerusalem became important, and most of them don't know this, the reason most of them became important was because of a conflict within Islam. You had the Muslims of Syria, who were being led by Walid ibn Khalid, was gaining too much power. And the Muslims in Saudi Arabia were fearful of that. And so when the Syrians wanted to make Hajj, to Mecca, they were told you're not allowed. And so he created this alternative Hajj to Al-Aqsa, to Jerusalem, as a way to consolidate his power over the Syrian, Lebanese, though it wasn't Syria and Lebanon at the time, but I'm talking geographic area.
Mhm.
That area's consolidate his control and power over them. And so he created this Hajj to Al-Aqsa. I mean, they were fighting as far back as then. And I think what happens is you not only have disparate interests, they're coming at it from two different main points of view. You were talking about pan-Arabism, which is in essence a secular movement. It's a nationalist movement, the desire to create an Arab land. And then you have Islamists, and they're in constant conflict. And we saw that in real time in Syria, where Bashar Assad, who's a Ba'ath Party member and an Alawite, so kind of a small sect of Islam, and the Ba'ath Party, which has its roots in the Nazi Party, which the Nazis were highly secular, anti-religion, even though they used Christians to help further. They were anti-religious. They were into the occult and rejected monotheism. So you have the Baathists, who was Assad, who was fighting ISIS, who was this radical Islamic group. And what happens is you have one group that may take control, and then another group will be like, well, you're not radical enough. You're not extreme enough. And so we're going to come and try and fight you for your lack of extremeness. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but for your lack of being extreme enough. And that's what the whole civil war in Syria was about, was secular pan-Arabists, really, versus Islamist radicals who were unhappy that the secularists weren't radical enough. And so this happens throughout the Islamic world, where there's this constant battle between levels of radical, like who's going to be the more radical. And so, like you were talking about Iran, they've got a level of compliance with regards to Sharia law that they think is necessary. But there are other people who are saying, you guys aren't harsh enough. Like, you guys aren't extreme enough, right? So this is the problem they're going to keep running into. This, and this is, again, why they lost in 48, and this is why they can never achieve statehood for the Palestinians, because it's not about statehood.
No.
It's about dominance and conquest and achieving more land mass and really just getting rid of the Jews. So I've used this example before, and I'm glad you brought it up. I say, if all the Jews tomorrow were like, yeah, we're packing up, we're leaving, we're going to the United States, we're going to go to Fiji, we're going to go to Europe, wherever you want us to go, we're going to leave. Here's the land. Within 24 hours, Fatah and Hamas are in a civil war.
Mhm.
And believe me, they're going to treat each other way worse than anything Israel has ever done to the Palestinians. We saw in the Gaza civil war how unbelievably harsh Hamas was with Fatah members. I mean, look, every death is a bad thing, especially for the person that dies, right? The person that gets killed. Ultimately, if you're dead, the reason you were killed is irrelevant to you because you're dead. But from a moral, philosophical, psychological point of view, there's a difference between death through war, unintentional, dropping a bomb from an airplane, getting hit by artillery, getting caught in a crossfire. Again, you're still dead. You're not happy about it, obviously, but there's a different moral, psychological framework that needs to be attached to. What Hamas did, which is looking your victim right in the eye, right? The personal nature of the crime, going to a baby in a crib, looking that baby in the face, pulling a trigger, slitting its throat, cutting off its head, raping a woman face to face, looking at her pain and her anguish. And one of the stories that we've heard come out from the eyewitnesses, one of the women was getting gang raped and she was screaming, just kill me already. I know you're going to kill me. And so if you can't make, and they can't, obviously, right? Because again, nuance is something they're lacking. But if you are a decent human being and you can't understand the moral difference between looking someone in the eye and purposefully trying to kill them versus someone being killed through war, it reminds me of death by firing squad. Do you know how that works?
Mhm.
The death by firing squad?
Yeah.
So I'll just tell everybody. So they have a firing squad, and you have one person that's going to be shot, and one person in the firing squad let's say it's 6, one person will have a blank. Why do they do that? Why do they give one person a blank and the other 5 people a bullet? Well, you can't just give one person a bullet because you want the death to be over quickly and painless, right? The guy's off a little bit. So you want the perpetrator to be killed right away because you don't want to inflict torture on them. But by having one blank, it leaves every soldier with a little bit of doubt that it was their bullet that did the killing. They can always tell themselves, my bullet was the blank, because the psychological effect of looking another human being in the eye and killing them, taking away their life, is so massive that we have to create some sort of psychological doubt so that they can survive that. Like, I don't know how many people, and I hope not a lot, but I don't know if you have actually been in a room with someone who dies. I was unfortunately in the room when both of my wife's grandfathers died. And I was in the hospital. My wife was pregnant for one of them, and you're not to go to the hospital when you're pregnant in Judaism, and just, I think it's for health reasons too. And look, I'm not a super spiritual guy. I still struggle with the miraculous and the supernatural when it comes to religion. It's something I'm working on. But I can tell you, being in the room when someone goes from living to dying, and I had nothing to do with it. It was just, you feel it. You feel that life force leave the room, and it had an effect on me. And it was, for a few days, I was like shook up a little bit. And these were older people. It was their time to go. It wasn't some tragedy. It was, they had lived a good full life. And I was like, wow, now to take that the next step further, right? And think about, like, if I was to pull the plug, or the idea of taking another human being's life, right? And ending their presence on earth, the moral depravity that comes from that is so immense. And it's one of the things we talk about in Judaism is, you're not just killing that person, you're killing all the people they could have created in the world, right? Especially with the Nova Music Festival. These are young people who were going to have families and going to have, so those children will never be born now. They will never have grandchildren. Generations of people that would have existed on earth no longer will be on earth. And the moral immenseness of doing that with your own hands and then celebrating it, it's a level of evil I wish I didn't have to, I wouldn't say experience, because I didn't experience it personally. It's a level of evil I wish I didn't have to know about. Like, I thought the Holocaust was as bad as it gets. Then you read about, Rwanda and how awful that was. And then you read about ISIS and what they were doing. And you're like, geez, our capacity for evil as human beings seems to be endless. And our capacity for goodness seems to be diminishing. And we need to get to a world where goodness is not just encouraged, it's celebrated. And I think that's the only way we can fight evil, is to celebrate and encourage goodness. And it starts at home. It starts with parents, it starts with teachers, teaching that we're in the West and we're pretty awesome and we've done a lot to make the world a better place. We're not perfect. That's why it says in the Constitution to strive to be a more perfect union, realizing that we are not perfect and there's always room for improvement. But being imperfect doesn't mean bad.
Yeah.
It just means we can get better. And we've lost sight of that in this country. And it's sad. It's very sad and scary.
Totally. I think this is a good place to wrap up. I'm going to link you below, all of your accounts.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to? Because you've got multiple. Every time I feel like I see a new one, I'm like, I thought I followed him. I'm like, oh no, not this one. But yeah.
Yeah, it's being a pro-Israel creator on TikTok. It's always, I always encourage people, have more than one account ready, because you're going to lose accounts, you're going to get suspended. No, I think this was great. I think this was fun, and I think this is these things are important. One person at a time seems like a daunting task. A huge hill to climb, and for some people, it seems like Sisyphus, who in Greek tragedy, every day he would wake up and he had a boulder, and his job for the day was to roll the boulder to the top of the mountain. And then when he got done rolling the boulder to the top of the mountain, it would roll down. And then every day he had to do that all over again. And so it seemed like a Herculean task Sisyphean task. But that's the only way it's going to change, is one person at a time. And I think you're doing a great job, and I enjoy your content and your reasonableness and your openness to learning.
Thank you.
Right? And acknowledging, look, I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. There's always more to learn. But to learn, you need to have an open mindedness and an energy that wants to learn. And I think that's a positive for when you have kids. And I hope you have lots of kids and teach your kids these values, because we need more good people like you having more children to combat the other side, which has children and teaches them bad values. And that's the only way you win the war.
Mm-hmm.
And by war, I mean the war of ideas and the war of values, is people having children and teaching their kids, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is evil. We're the US, we're great. We struggle at times, we fall on our faces at times, but we're always trying to do a better job than or at least we should be. And this was great. This was fun. I'm glad I could be a part of it. I appreciate you letting me on. This was awesome.
Thank you. So all of his stuff will be linked below. Everyone go check that out. I'll stop recording now. Okay. Thank you so much.